We have Mr. Ansel Lurio, who is currently suing Lyft over wheelchair accessible vehicles. And today we're going to be talking about legislative advocacy and transportation in rural America. At this point, I'd like to hand it over. Mr. Lurio, if you would introduce yourself.
Yeah, again, my name is Ansel Lurio. I am about almost 38 years old, and I have Duchenne muscular dystrophy, which is basically a muscle wasting disease, and I I was born with that condition, and I currently live in Yonkers, New York, which is borders New York City to the north. Um, in addition to my advocacy work, I'm also a freelance copy editor. So, and what else?
Did I
I,
read something about a library?
I'm sorry.
Are you involved with a library system there in New York?
Uh, no, not a library system. No, no.
Must have misread that then. Um, the
Yeah, no.
I
I have a background in like museums. So, yeah, but not libraries. Not exactly. No.
Okay. Did you pursue secondary education after high school?
Yes, I have a degree in American Studies from Columbia, and then I have a master's degree in museum studies from State University of New York. So
If you don't mind me asking, why did you want to go into that field?
into museums,
Yeah.
um, I don't know. I mean, I like museums. It's a sort of unique way of telling stories, so I guess that's what sort of got me interested in that. So,
Do you have a particularly favorite museum?
um, I guess probably the here in New York, probably the Metropolitan, just because it has so many different types of art and everything. So,
Hmm.
uh,
I went to there's one in Chicago I went to that was pretty cool. And I remember I got to see, there was a lion, two lions there that were called man eaters. And there was a long history in India about them. And I got to see them at the museum in Chicago. I thought it was so cool.
that's cool.
But I haven't checked out any museums in New York yet.
Okay.
Okay, so let's jump into the topic that we're all wanting to hear about today. Give us a little bit of background about how this lawsuit with Lyft came to be.
Well, the lawsuit with Lyft actually predated me. This is at Westchester Disabled on the Move. It started in 2017 when this woman named I'm trying to remember her name. Oh, Harriet Lowell, who's a scooter and motorized wheelchair user, wasn't able to um, get a Lyft vehicle when she went on the app and tried to get one, and she decided to sue them. And so actually the lawsuit is Lowell versus Lyft. And then she basically asked for Westchester Disabled on the Move to sign on as a plaintiff as well. So that's sort of where the lawsuit started from. So,
Hmm. And so more support there from a local community, I imagine increases the advocacy efforts. Now, do you have a personal story about your troubles with transportation through Lyft or private companies like that?
yes, yes, I do. A number of years ago, I'm not sure, maybe like it might have been about 4 or 5 years ago. I was at the dentist, not too far from my home, a few miles away, and they had forecasted that there might be some snow showers, and so I was like, okay, I can probably get home on my own. I mean, I rolled over there in my wheelchair, so I expect to do the same back. And this was in November, and I was in the dentist. I saw this snow keep on falling outside, and it seemed to be piling up quite a bit. And by the time I got out, it was like blizzard conditions outside, and I basically tried to go a few feet outside, tried to get a bus, but there were all these cars spinning out of control and ice and everything, and I was like, forget it, this is dangerous and not a good idea. So I went back to the dentist's office and I waited a little while, and then I um, thought I need to figure out a way to get out of here. And I first tried to get an ambulette or something like that, but there was none around. And so then I thought maybe I could get a ride share through Lyft or Uber or something, but um, I wasn't able to do that. And basically, the only option I had was an ambulance. And the only place the ambulance could take me was the hospital. So I ended up staying overnight at the hospital, even though there was nothing wrong with me. And it was very frustrating. And uh, I mean, it was a waste of money for the medical services, the ambulance, and everything. So it was it, it was a disastrous situation. So,
Yeah, I mean, it would. I imagine the car ride's probably 5 or 10 minutes, and that turned
yes, yeah,
into
it was very close.
24 hours.
Yes, exactly.
Now, you mentioned a word that you tried to get an ambulance. Is that correct? Did I say that correct?
An ambulette. Yes,
I've never heard
that's
that word.
it's basically it, it's just transportation that brings you to and from medical appointments.
Okay.
It's I mean it's often paid through by Medicaid, or I mean people sometimes do it out of pockets, but I mean it's an accessible transportation, but it's just for medical
Uh,
appointments. So
would it kind of be like a shuttle? We have a few shuttles around Birmingham that you have to schedule a pickup and a drop off for. Kind of smaller, not like a big bus, not public transportation kind of thing, almost like a church bus. Would I be thinking about that in the same?
yeah, I guess that might be about that size. Yeah, 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 that might be similar to that.
So you were at your doctor's appointment, your dentist appointment, and as you get out now, from people from Alabama, we don't experience snowstorms quite often, but when they get
You,
bad
you
up
know,
north,
what? I'm sorry.
go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, what did you say about it?
I was just going to say we don't really experience snowstorms down here, but up north they can get bad very quick.
Yes, yes, they can. Though I mean, this was before Thanksgiving either. This was very rare and freak even for our area. So
And you went through kind of the Rolodex of your transportation options, and they were all failing for you. You
yes,
couldn't get a ride through local services. The public transportation was breaking down. Cars were going everywhere. And you turned to
yeah,
private services like Lyft, and you didn't have the option to have a wheelchair accessible vehicle um, basically come.
yes, exactly. Yeah,
You had to call an ambulance. The ambulance could only take you to the hospital. And there at the hospital, you had to tell them everything's fine. I'm just looking for a ride home, but you
yeah,
had to stay at the hospital overnight because you couldn't get transportation home.
yes, yes. And ambulances don't really. I mean, they don't really give you a ride home then from the ambulance back to your home. That's not really how it works either. So
Yeah, it sounds like such a breakdown in transportation. There's something that should have taken 5 minutes. Like we said,
yes,
takes
exactly.
24 hours.
Yeah, yeah.
So what exactly is the lawsuit with Lyft? What specifically are you asking for? And if you could tell us kind of in layman terms, for somebody that doesn't have much legal jargon background.
Okay, well, as it stands right now, outside of a few select areas, the including New York City, San Francisco, and a few other places, which have basically written into law and required that companies like Lyft or Uber have accessible vehicles. They're basically, I mean, there aren't any accessible vehicles anywhere else, and so the point of the lawsuit is to make it so that uh, they do have to be required to have some accessible vehicles outside those areas. I mean, it's basically if there's Lyft or Uber services in an area that just normal folks use, disabled folks should be able to use that as well. So, and another big thing is that in New York City, when you go on the Lyft app in New York City, it gives you the option of getting a wheelchair accessible lift. But as soon as you're outside of the city limits, they basically that feature is shut off, which means that even if someone has a wheelchair accessible vehicle or a wave, as we call them, and they just happen to go from New York City to Westchester, where I live. Um, they they can't they themselves can't say that they have a wheelchair accessible vehicle either. So,
Mhm.
I mean, part of it is not just asking them to get accessible vehicles, it's asking them to um, turn on this toggle switch to allow both consumers and the drivers to basically the drivers to tell the passengers that they have an accessible vehicle, and for the passengers to say they want an accessible vehicle. So,
So there are drivers and there are those passengers that are in an area, but if you get outside of the city boundaries, Lyft's app will toggle off that option to request or to say that you have a wave, wheelchair accessible vehicle, and
basically both. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
that's crazy to me because it would seem as a company, you would want as many rides. And why would you try and limit willing drivers and willing passengers from getting together? Um,
Yes, it
it's
is.
yeah, it doesn't make sense there. I don't know why they do that. But then you mentioned that there are certain major cities in the U.S. that
Yeah.
require ride sharing companies to have accessible vehicles and to post them. And did that
Yeah.
all come about by New York City suing Lyft?
I it happened partly through lawsuits within the city and everything. I mean, it definitely was a struggle in New York City for a while as also.
Yeah.
So
Now, are you suing Lyft to get it in your hometown, or is this more of a national thing that you'd like to see implemented?
no, it's a nationwide thing. I mean, personally, it would Um, th- I mean, it's what I would like in my area, but yeah, definitely wherever there's Lyft or Uber service, yeah, for it to be nationwide, yes. And and there are declarations from people around the country in this lawsuit, so it's not just for this area; it's for nationwide.
I know that we could definitely benefit here in Alabama. Sometimes we are pretty rural outside of our major cities, Huntsville, Birmingham, Montgomery, Mobile. And
Yeah,
a lot of individuals who receive services do not live in those major metropolitan areas. I am going to acknowledge our chat here, and then I'd like you to give us a little bit of how some progress has gone in the past years. So, just one second. Paige Perry, says safe, reliable, affordable paratransit is a top problem facing people with disabilities in the United States. After COVID, it is a huge problem in Birmingham and Jefferson County, Alabama. Publicly funded Class Trans states that they do not have any drivers willing to work for them. They are funded by the federal and local governments. She also says that, yes, you are describing the same problem our family faces. The city limits of Birmingham have some transport, but with smaller municipalities such as Hoover, larger municipalities do not have paratransit options. So I think we're kind of seeing that as soon as you get over that boundary for that town or that city, the same transportation isn't available in some of the more rural areas there. Thank you, Mrs. Perry, for being with us here today. Is there anything that pops up from what Mrs. Perry was kind of saying there?
Um, yeah, I guess so. I'm trying to sort of figure out what exactly she's saying. She's saying that there's, yeah. I mean, that's definitely true in places in rural New York. Even in like say, um, Suffolk County in on Long Island here. I happen to know that they've been talking a lot about um, cutting bus routes and stuff there, and that would definitely affect paratransit as well. So, um, yeah, I agree with that completely.
Yeah, cutting the bus routes takes transportation away from, individuals that rely on that to go to work, to be a part of their community. We don't have great public transportation here. They've talked about getting like a railroad system set up. I saw they were trying to do some Amtrak based out of Atlanta that would go over to Birmingham, those kinds of things. But in general, and our state's kind of weird. From what I understand, you have to go like county by county if you want to do a railroad, and the county has to sign on that, yes, we can do this. So you have this long list of counties that have to approve it before you could even get what we would consider as, our Huntsville, Birmingham, Montgomery, Mobile. We would love to see connected because those are our four major cities, and if we could have, better transportation to those, I think it would help out a lot of commerce, and working individuals like that. But so we're seeing that all over the country, individuals having a hard time getting transportation services. And I agree. I have heard people saying that they're having a hard time finding drivers, hiring drivers, even for services during, day services or anything like that. So that is something that we're seeing there. So tell us a little bit about some progress that's been made. You mentioned this case has been ongoing since about 2017. What are some milestones that you'd like to highlight?
Some milestones. Uh, I guess some milestones is that I mean they've had to go through different discovery stages, things like that. I would say some as far as when how far I've been involved. I guess some highlights were when we got depositions from people across the country. Um, what else? Uh, I mean, oh well, declarations from people across the country. I'm sorry.
Are
I
those
guess another.
declarations, are they public? Can we see them?
I really don't know. You'd have to ask the lawyers. But
I think it would be
basically,
great.
I mean, basically, what they include is you could put in a declaration if you used a wheelchair, a non-foldable wheelchair. You tried to get Lyft, you were denied. Oh wait, no, that you couldn't have done that actually. If you had, you actually could have never downloaded the Lyft app at all because if you downloaded the Lyft app all in the fine print, it basically said you cannot sue us. So we could only actually get uh, them from uh, declarations from people who had never tried to use the app but would have liked to. So that was
Hmm.
basically for that. Another big milestone was when they did depositions, and I actually was deposed on behalf of Westchester Disabled on the Move. So that was about that was about a year ago. So, and then, so there was this hearing the other day, which was sort of the first big like in-person court thing, and then they've scheduled a trial for January if the two sides can't settle. So
Hmm.
so yeah, I think we're getting near to where they're going to make a decision. So
Yeah, so it's set to have in-person trial in, you mentioned January, correct?
yes, yes, correct.
So we'll have to keep up on that. I'm interested. Now, what does a successful case look like for you and the organization and the advocacy that you do?
Well, I mean, we would love it if we could get the equal access to Lyft, but I I mean, I would say even I, I mean expanding the reach of it would be a success to some extent. Uh, I, I would say that the expansion of services would be a success.
Yeah. How do you think they're going to respond? Do you think that Lyft will be like, okay, yes, we want to move forward with this, and we are going to have wheelchair accessible vehicles in every part that we operate and serve, and the option to request or the option to bring drivers and passengers together for wave vehicles everywhere that we have services. So those, you think they're going to do that?
Do you think they're going to settle, or
Do you think
is
they're
that
going to
what
go
you're
in and
asking?
they're going to change that in the app where you can request, and that they'll have wave transportation in all markets?
I I hope so. I mean, I definitely don't think they're just going to roll over and do everything. I mean, I'm sure there'll be some pushback, and I'm sure any change will take time. So
Yeah. Are you noticing other ride sharing software companies are doing the same? Is Uber under the same magnifying glass for doing the same thing?
yeah, I mean, there's really no reason. It was Uber. It just happened to be Lyft. I mean,
Mm.
I think companies like Uber basically have similar policies. So
Yeah. So this could be kind of a blanket case where um, if the community wins, then all ride sharing services would kind of have to be under this precedent. So lots on your
yes, I believe so. Yeah.
a lot is on your shoulders. We have a question in chat. Page Paradise, does Mr. Lurio have any tips for people with disabilities to try to advocate for better wheelchair transport for themselves without needing an attorney or having to enter the court system?
Well, I mean, I I I think a lot of times there may be a pushback, but I think it's worth it to. I mean, you should always start by asking nicely, and then sort of escalating it from there. I mean, I think that getting a lawyer and going to court and everything. I mean, I think that should be sort of the last option out there. Uh, so, and I mean, I would say just also, I mean, don't let it slide. I mean, definitely say something about them, and I mean, like the Department of Justice also takes like, I mean, I guess this isn't exactly the court system. I mean, you can sort of put in a complaint to, I believe, the Department of Justice about an ADA issue with something. So
And I always reference the ADA. I love how you said, start nicely, but really don't back down. And I think a lot of that confidence can come from knowing your rights, knowing the ADA and how that applies to you, and what you want to get in life. And so, it doesn't always have to be an attorney with a sharp edge. Um, I think a lot of people uh, are compassionate and want to help and want to, have a full community where everybody's active.
And I think sometimes even if you're talking about a small business or something, they sometimes don't even know exactly that they're doing something wrong or there's an issue. I mean, I think it's different with a big corporation like Lyft, but a, a lot of times people need to be educated.
Yeah, I think a lot. It's like we don't know what we don't know, and so sometimes it's on us as a community to reach out and educate. Um, you know, best with a shaking hand. Um, how can we help support this case and your cause?
I would say the biggest thing is publicity. I think we need people to know that there's an issue. I have a feeling a lot of people don't know about this um, i- issue at all, both disabled and non-disabled Americans. So I think that the biggest thing is just to put it out there, share with uh, people you know. Yeah, just spread the word. I would say is the most important thing.
Is there a place? Are you looking for people to sign on? Is there any place that we can sign on and show support? Do you need a certain number of individuals that have testimonials, or you guys are all set there? So I'm more just sharing.
We're all set with that. Yeah, yeah, we've gotten all the. I mean, we're basically closed to declarations at this point. So yeah.
Okay. So it starts in January, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be done in January. Sometimes these cases can take years, and it's an ongoing
Yes.
thing.
Yeah, but I think we're thinking that the judge will make a decision if there's a trial coming up. So.
Now, I imagine I've never even got called for jury duty, so I don't really know much about the legal system. But I imagine this is taking quite some time from you and effort there. So, why? Where do you find the courage and the advocacy to go and do this?
Well, I mean, I think it helps that it's not just me as an individual; it's me through a, a organization that represents a lot of people. Westchester Disabled on the Move. I mean, we're an independent living center here in Westchester, and so I think that's part of it. Also, it's not like I mean, I think the issue also is that it's not like we're going to lose access to something. It's something we don't have access to yet. So I feel like there's not much to lose there. So
Hmm. That's a great way to look at that. You've only got to gain. It's something you currently don't have. You're fighting for it. But if for whatever reason the judge doesn't approve it, it's not like the situation has gotten worse because it was never there in the beginning.
yes, I agree with that. Though I mean, I when we were collecting the declarations, there were definitely people who said, "No, I don't want to be a part of it. I'm scared to do that." So. Um,
To kind of be in the public there.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some people who are afraid of retribution or something, but I I
I've
think it's really yeah.
I've heard, well, even like on the local level in your local school district, I've heard families, parents, individuals say that they're not getting the services that they need in the school system. And sometimes the students and the parents are a little bit reluctant to speak up because they're afraid of maybe some backlash there. And so, what would you say to maybe someone that's not receiving all of the services that they want and need, but are a little reluctant to kind of, it can be tough getting into a little confrontation sometimes.
I think it helps when it's not just you uh when you're part of a group. So I mean, I guess in the situation of the schools, I mean, it might be useful to find other parents who are in your um, the same boat you are. So I think that can be a way to sort of deal with that, support of other people, and to sort of, I mean, it's the same as like with a union or something. I mean, it it can make and I mean, I think it can make even a bigger change.
Hmm. You got to find your tribe. Um, Power in numbers.
Yes, yes.
Now you're doing, quite a bit of advocacy. Is this your first kind of instance of really doing big advocacy, or have there been other things? Like, have you worked up to this point throughout your life? Have you had to advocate for yourself, and you've gotten that experience, and that has allowed you to kind of build upon for this case?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I've been uh I've gone to rallies and court things for this before. I mean, I definitely went to events for the Taxis for All campaign in New York City. Um, uh, I mean, the part of the I mean, part of the reason I got involved with Westchester Disabled on the Move is that I was a few years ago I was living in Mount Vernon, New York, which borders Yonkers, where I live now, and Westchester Disabled on the Move was trying to get people together there to uh, create an advisory board to the city government there, of people with disabilities, which had been done in a couple places in Westchester. I know that Yonkers has a disability advisory board to the mayor, and basically they were looking for people to be involved with that, and I got very involved with that, sort of helping to write changes to the city code, writing bylaws for um, such a committee, and with my help, we did get it approved by the city council there and make it a reality. And because of that, I was asked to be on the board of Westchester Disabled on the Move. So
That's pretty amazing. I don't know if we have that panel here, that board here for our city government, but that is an amazing thing to be at the table helping codify these laws to make sure they're accessible and universal. Because, like you mentioned, sometimes people just aren't aware. And so it's very important for our community to be at the table to represent um, what needs to be done in the local community. It's I was having a discussion the other day saying that all new building, like a residential building, should be universally designed.
yes, I
The
yeah, absolutely agree with that.
And we have that was Mr. Graham Sisson, who is he's the executive director of the governor's office on disability here in Alabama. And my initial thing was, well, I don't know if you would want to require that every new building residential would. And he goes, if you're lucky enough to live to old age, you are going to need these things. So the house that you will need these things eventually. You might as well invest in it now when you're building it. And it made total sense to me. It's like, I get that.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so it's important, and it's awesome that you have the opportunity there to sit at that table when these citywide mandates or new things are going into being in practice, and having a voice there, and making it known.
Yeah.
Um, I would like to. We kind of touched on this a little bit, but I would like some of the audience members to do some advocacy from learning what you've done and what you're continuing to do. What would you say is how can we best make change at the local level?
Best make changes at the local level. Well, I
Mhm.
would say first of all, you should find out uh, who's in charge on in the local level, who your mayors, your uh, local representatives, city council members are, so you know who to basically contact. And I mean, you could start really small. I mean, you could start with complaining about one street where there's no curb cut or something like that. So
Hmm.
I think it's I don't think there's anything too small, and then you can kind of build up from there. And I think it's also important, as I said, to have bigger numbers, so sort of find other people who have that same affinity.
Yeah, and this could start even if you are in middle school, high school, and you'd like to start working on some advocacy skills and training. Just like you mentioned, on your local sidewalk, if you see there's a place that doesn't have an entry ramp there,
Yeah,
start with that. Get
yeah.
local. I
I
love
mean,
hiking.
yeah. I would add to that that when I was, I believe, in middle school or high school, I actually volunteered for the town supervisor in Greenberg, which is in the suburbs of New York City, and I volunteered to sort of mark areas where there weren't curb cuts in my village. So I that was one of my first advocacy. Um,
Yeah, so you were starting like 10, 11, 12 years old right there.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Now, is this something that your parents were kind of like, "Hey, we'd like you to do this," or was this all like, "I want to do this"? Support from the parents kind of thing.
I would say it was mostly my idea for the disability advocacy. I mean, I think my parents had always been my advocates and sort of my education, things like that. I mean, they were very involved with sort of the muscular dystrophy community. I mean, I would say part of the reason I got involved is that I mean, I would say in terms of a lot of rare disease communities like muscular dystrophy, at least when I was young, there was a lot more emphasis on just finding a cure and really looking at the medical model of things. And I was like, but I mean, it didn't really cover things that happened in daily life and just the social aspects of, and everything of it. So
Yeah, kind of a clinical entrance to that. Here's a pill, here's a shot, but not really thinking
yeah,
about daily living, community living.
well, it was sort of like it wasn't really thinking about how the greater community could sort of uh, be more inclusive of people with disabilities. It was sort of almost like trying to fix things to make us be able to be in the community rather than community trying to change to better accommodate people with disabilities.
Yeah, and that's what we need long term is kind of that
Yeah,
change for
yeah,
society as a whole.
and I mean, I'm not putting down those organizations who are trying to find a cure and really do treatment stuff like that, but I just don't think it's everything. I think there needs to be more.
I have a family member, and she has cerebral palsy. It's one of the big things that, we do range of motion exercises, some light lifting, those types of things.
Yeah,
It's so important for her to constantly be trying to utilize her body, um,
yeah,
to have that physical well being. Are
yeah.
there certain movements or techniques or activities that you enjoy that you'd recommend other families, individuals try out?
Hmm. It's an interesting question. I don't know. I mean, it has to be something you enjoy, first of all. I think, I mean, one thing is, I mean, I think that, I mean, if there's like a team sport or something, I mean, I think that's maybe the best thing. I mean, I think you shouldn't just look at it just as exercise. I think if it's part of a more social environment, the better. Because, I mean, I've gone to like physical therapy and stuff, which is, I'm sure it helps, but for a few years before the pandemic, I went to this specialized gym here in New York City that has adaptive training equipment and stuff, and it was really great to just have the community of other people with disabilities working out and everything. So,
Yeah, I think that community aspect, that social aspect, is much needed. We have a foundation here, the Lakeshore Foundation, that does quite a bit of adaptive sports, team sports, and also I think United Ability is going to start to get into that realm again. So there are options here in Alabama, and I will say I've gone to the gym before, but I end up um, going back more often when it's a team sport and there's a little bit of accountability there, and I'm
yes,
having fun with other people.
yeah,
Yeah. Um, so we've talked a lot about transportation. The case is going to be heard by the judge in January, so we'll keep an eye on that. And maybe we'll do a follow up broadcast with when that gets decided upon and see how the
yes,
progress is. Okay,
yeah.
good.
No, that's great.
Outside of transportation, what is another kind of hot topic that you're seeing that needs more advocacy?
Well, I would say uh, the issues with home care. I think that's probably the biggest issue right now. Both um, I mean, sort of, there's not enough home healthcare aides for people who have disabilities, and then on the other hand, they're not getting they're not getting paid enough either. So
Hmm.
yeah, I would say that's the biggest, one of the biggest issues right now. So,
I know here in Alabama, we're doing a rate study,
mm,
for the reimbursement to try and raise rates for caregivers, direct
yeah,
support personnel. But it is a thing for providers and even for individuals that want to hire, um, for their own outside of any provider organization. It is tough right now with inflation, to compete with the starting salaries or starting hourly wages from other organizations. So that is something that we're definitely feeling. And it's a little bit tough too, because it takes so long to give them a raise if it's Medicaid or, insurance reimbursed. It's not like a small organization where you can kind of raise salaries, when you need to and when you want to.
yes, exactly.
We're doing a decent amount of advocacy for that here. A lot of providers are here in the state trying to expand some of the Medicaid and get reimbursement rates up. I just came across this. It does deal in transportation. I get this Kiplinger letter, about once a month, and I always enjoy reading it. But it talks a little bit this week on being able to use your chair while flying. Have you heard anything about that?
Yes, yes, I have, and I've actually been to DC on behalf of the Muscular Dystrophy Association to um, to lobby in DC on that issue. So I have actually been involved with that, and that really does affect me personally. Also, I've had some really bad experiences with flying. So
Yeah, that's a huge thing. I have a friend here who utilizes a power chair, and he said the running joke is if you want a new chair, just go for a flight.
yes, yes, I would agree with that.
Yeah. So this is pretty big then, and I imagine it'll kind of be like other public areas where there is seating, but there are open areas. Like if you go into a movie theater or you go to watch a football game, there are areas where there are no chairs, and that would kind of be like on an airplane, where maybe you could lock the wheels in place or lock down into some things. Is that kind of the thought behind that?
Yeah, I think it's more akin to sort of spaces on there's spaces if you go on like Amtrak or something where there's no seats where a wheelchair can go. I think that's what
Yeah.
they're thinking, something like that. So,
I just want to read this. It has a couple cool statistics in here. So, wheelchair users may soon be able to sit in them when flying, rather than be transferred into an airplane seat, as is currently required. The Department of Transportation is mulling new rules for domestic airlines. Aviation experts say that such a proposal is feasible. Though more tests are needed to ensure wheelchairs safety standards. For years, flyers have complained of airlines damaging their wheelchairs when checked with baggage. Last year, airlines handled 532,000 wheelchairs and scooters, with 7,000 reported damaged and mishandled. And they say that's a little bit more than 1%. But what you don't realize is that for those that use wheelchairs, if they don't have their wheelchair or it's not working properly, that is their way to access the greater community, get around. And I actually heard a story one time where the wheelchair was just moved a little bit, and the individual whose wheelchair it was couldn't get properly situated after the airlines had handled it, and she actually got an infection from that and ended up passing away.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
That's terrible. But
So hopefully, some cool things are happening in transportation that we should see enacted here in the next few years for greater
yeah,
accessibility.
yes, I definitely hope so.
Mr. Lorio, I appreciate you spending time with us this afternoon, and on top of all the advocacy that you do for the greater community.
Thank you. Thanks. It's been a pleasure.
Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you think an individual or a family could benefit from hearing?
I can't think of anything particular. I think just the most important thing is to take action. Don't just sit around and let things happen. I mean, it's if you think if there's a right you have, I mean, fight for it. So
Yeah, and I love that you started really doing this in middle school. I think it's so important at an early age to gain that confidence and those skills to communicate. So the earlier, the better.
yes, absolutely.
Well, Mr. Lorio, once again, thank you for being with us here this afternoon. And this will conclude our broadcast. We'll reach back out in January just to kind of see how things are going and get an update at that point.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, sir, you have a great rest of your day. And all you have to do to exit the